Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today's guest, Kendall Baab, is the owner and founder of BodyKinect, an online business for strength and conditioning for dancers and a great source for dance science education. She's also a lecturer at Loyola Marymount University Dance Department. You may also know her from Instagram or TikTok as @TrainWithKendall. She has background in a variety of ways with dance science, strength and conditioning, personal training, Pilates instructor. The list goes on and on. As we're talking in this episode today, we talk a lot about how we can apply concepts of dance science into our lives as dancers, how we can integrate it into the classroom as dance teachers, or things that maybe we need to consider as a parent of a dancer. We talk about all of those things and more, so make sure to check out the full episode. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, I am excited for our guest, Kendall Baab. Welcome.
Yay, thank you so much.
So my first question for everybody is always give us a little bit more about who you are and what got you in this space of working with the dance community.
Yeah, it's always a good place to start. So my name is Kendall. I, of course, grew up a dancer, did all of the styles and did competitive dance. And when I got into college, realized like I wanted to still dance, but I wanted to do a little bit more than just dance. And that's when I discovered dance science. And I found that to be really interesting. And then I continued to get my dance science degree from Cal State Long Beach in California. And then my Pilates and personal training certifications, because I started to kind of fall in love with the fitness side of things and realized that, I probably could have been such a better dancer in the past too if I had been doing more strength training or more Pilates, and those tools just weren't even, it's not that they weren't accessible, it just wasn't, the connection wasn't there for the environment that I was growing up in. And then after that, started training with some dancers. I was teaching Pilates, I was teaching dance, I was doing personal training. I was quite literally all over Southern California doing all of these things until I decided I wanted to learn a little bit more and dive deeper into the research side of dance science. And that's when I found my master's degree in dance science at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London, UK. And then from there started my business, and now kind of combined all of those umbrellas that I was doing under one roof of training dancers and educating dancers about their bodies and dance science and safe dance practices. And so now that is what I do is mostly work with dancers online and some in person as well, and connect with teachers and kind of hopefully start to transform the competitive dance scene and just youth dance scene in general to lead them to more sustainable practices, so they're not 8 years old and having back injuries, and really just getting them to a place where they can enjoy being a kid and enjoy dance and not hurt themselves. So that is my ultimate goal.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a couple of things that you said that really resonate with me where it's like, oh, yes, I'm on the same page. I think the first one is when you were saying, thinking back of your own dance history and things like that, of how much different of a dancer you might have been, or maybe not having injuries that you had or things like that, where amazing things could have happened if we had been able to apply some of what we know now through all of the things that we're doing in the dance medicine and dance science world to ourselves as young dancers. And I think about that sort of thing all the time, of injuries that I had or things that I struggled with technique wise, where I thought my body just wasn't cut out for some of those movements. And in fact, it just wasn't trained properly to accomplish some of those movements.
Right. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm not good at turns, and just I'm a jumper, not a turner." Well, why not? Because it just never clicked for you, or because you maybe have some muscle imbalances. Like, instead of just labeling having the dancer label themselves as that, or like, I'm a righty, I'm a lefty, like creating a more, not just keeping them safe from injuries, but creating like a well-rounded dancer, I think is also important too.
Hmm. Most definitely. And then I think the other piece is just thinking about helping keep dancers as safe as possible through something that we know is a high risk activity. But minimizing those risks is really important, and having some good training and strength and stability and all of these different things is so important for that.
Yeah, and that's what kind of inspired me to start working with dancers that are even younger. The youngest I typically work with is like 7 or 8. I've worked with younger than that before, but it's more just like fun kind of movement patterns thing, not like feel this muscle right here, and they don't know what you're talking about. Um, but I think at that young of an age, developing that body awareness can be so helpful. And
Mhm.
I it's not that, obviously adults can benefit from strength training and body awareness and injury prevention and all of those things as you get further into the art of dance, but even from a young age, with especially in the competitive dance world, all of these tricks being added into solos and dances, and they see things on social media that they want to try, and there's all these new flashy things to do in dance, but they don't have the strength or maybe the flexibility to do it, or just
Mhm.
lack of awareness of like the safety of different positions of their body. And so those are the things that I start to get a little worried about, because I have worked with dancers who are 9 years old and complain of lower back pain. And it's crazy to me that they can feel that at 9. So that's really the age group that I love working with, is the younger ones. But that's not to say like even as adults, like I currently teach at Loyola Marymount University, and I work with kinesiology for dancers and like those collegiate level dancers, and they're even learning things for the first time and applying it to their own bodies, and have told me that they're mind blown too by certain things that they just thought were always one way, and now all of a sudden, oh, it's shedding some new light onto the way they've been doing their warm-ups, for instance, or how they've been treating an injury, and things like that can make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. Let's maybe talk a little bit, just because you just mentioned it, and I think it's a good place to start. Let's talk a bit about warm ups for dancers.
Hmm.
I know when I was growing up, a lot of times warming up was we sit and we do our splits, and maybe you kind of roll through your feet a little bit, and that was sort of our warm up. But
Hmm.
now we know that there's a lot of what could change and maybe improve there. Talk a little bit about maybe some key elements to consider for a dancer warming up.
Yeah, when I was growing up, it was the same thing. A lot of stretching, a full kind of jazz isolation warm up, stretching every body part, but like doing 8 different stretches for the hamstrings, like really, really honing on the
Mhm.
hamstrings. And I think now, at least what I try to teach is looking at it from a bigger perspective, like zooming out, and looking at the whole body, and kind of, first of all, just assessing, okay, how does my body feel today? Is something hurting? Is something sore? Am I tired? Do I feel like I'm full of energy? Like, what's going on for me? And
Mhm.
then that kind of helps craft your warm up from there, because if you're feeling really tired, maybe you need to start slow and like move your body and get into it a little bit more, or maybe you do more of like a mental preparation in your warm up. But generally speaking, bringing blood flow to the whole body, I think, is really important, and not something that a lot of dancers start with, like some cardio exercises to start. And I'll admit, sometimes it can be uncomfortable to be the only one in the room doing jumping jacks while everyone else is talking with their friends in their splits on their phones. But you know what? Like, we've all probably been in that situation or seen it happen. Um,
Mhm.
and your body's going to thank you. You're going to feel like a little out of breath. You're going to feel warmer throughout the whole body, not just stretched and ready. Sometimes you don't need to be stretched to the max for certain techniques. Um,
Mhm.
then from there, like mobilizing the joints and just doing some active stuff, like moving, I think is the main thing, because if we're just sitting in our splits or sitting in a straddle or going to a lunge, yeah, we're moving, but there's a lot of holding still. And when in dance are we really holding still in that position for very long? Probably not for that long, right? And if
Yeah.
we're prepping our body for how we're going to move later, that kind of shifts how we view the warm up as being specific to whatever style I'm going to dance in or whatever technique I'm going to do. Or if you're in a solo rehearsal, what skills do you have in your solo that you need to prepare for? Maybe you have a
Mhm.
lot of turns, so you need to practice some standing, like some single leg work and some core. And I think that connection between the warm up and the dancing part is often
Mhm.
really missed in a lot of dancers, no matter their age.
Yeah, definitely. I know one thing I found even for myself, because I still dance and compete, I have certain injuries and things that are always, kind of I don't want to say problem spots, not necessarily pain spots, but just things where I'm aware that it works a little different than the
Right.
other side. And so I always make sure that part of my warm up is also priming some of the muscles in those areas to just kind of be like, hey, you have an extra job to do right now. Like,
Yeah.
remember that this is what you need to do. And that
Mhm.
makes a big difference in how I feel like I'm able to perform versus if I skip some of those things.
Yes, I agree. And then we see risks of injuries happening again, but risks of re-injury too. And now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, I was in PT for my shoulder last year, and then later in the year was in PT for a lower back injury. And even though my injuries weren't related to dance specifically, every time I work out now, I'm doing something for my shoulder, I'm doing something for my back. Every time I'm taking a dance class, something for my shoulder, something for my back. Even if it's not hurting anymore, but you still want to bring that mental awareness to the body part, so you're not putting yourself in a compromising position to re-injure that area again. And that's when those lovely PT exercises come back in, and you carry a
Mhm.
TheraBand in your dance bag, or you have a lacrosse ball, whatever the exercise might be. But bringing those and making them into part of your warm up as well. That's a great spot for those physical therapy exercises, or just like fitness exercises in general in the warm up.
Mhm. I think this starts to segue nicely into this idea of that individual training for dancers. So it's not just about getting yourself warmed up, doing some of the different strength and conditioning activities that we might be doing, but making sure that it's fitting that individual and, like you were saying, fitting what they're about to do as well in preparation.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things to consider, and a lot of times I think the immediate feedback I get is, well, I don't know what we're going to do in class because my teacher didn't say what we're going to do, or like we just start class and we follow along. But if you as the teacher know that you're doing a jazz class, you're probably going to do some turns, you're probably going to balance on one leg at some point, probably going to do a leap, right? And you can guess
Mhm.
those things as a dancer as well. Even if you aren't entirely sure what you're going to do in class, you can still prepare for those basic movement patterns in dance, which is like all of those things I just said, but doing
Mhm.
them in your warm up and preparing for it, even if it doesn't happen in a combo or it doesn't happen in class.
Yeah, for sure. I know one thing that I really appreciate. I One of the classes that I regularly take is an adult tap class, and the teacher for this class in particular makes a real effort of, even in our warm up, of doing movements or steps or patterns that she knows is coming up in across the floor activities, and those
Mhm.
are chances to also work on things that are going to be in some of the choreography that she teaches us later. So it's this really nice buildup of different activities to that choreography piece as well. And, it definitely takes some additional sort of thinking ahead for her of maybe some of that sequencing for things. But I also feel like once you get in that habit, it becomes easier to go through that process and doesn't require some of that work ahead of time. And I really appreciate that she takes the time to do that.
Yeah, and you probably feel better going into the choreography too as the dancer. One of my favorite things that, well, it's kind of a twofold, but it's maybe not one of my favorite things. But I see a lot of times, and this was happening when I was a dancer. I did it. I see it happen with like dancers in classes that I teach too. You do a full warm up and you go across the floor. You're practicing. You do all these different progressions, and by the time you do leaps, everyone's like, okay, we're going to do a leap in second or a middle leap or a center leap, whatever you want to call it. And everyone drops down like into a plie and like stretches out. And they're like, okay, I'm ready. Like, let's go. Like, I got to do some
Mhm.
extra stretches. I got to drop into my splits. And my kind of hot take on that is, well, why do you need to drop down into that plie? Shouldn't you have already prepped for that in the warm up? And shouldn't you be ready and not have to do like more warm up before you go across the floor for that? And
Mhm.
there's a nuance to all of this, but the point being, they're not prepared for class after the warm up. And so they feel the need to do more. And at what point, like, can you get to a point where you feel like you're adequately prepared and you're confident in how your body feels and confident in your skills that you can go for it, and you know how it feels, you know how what it's supposed to look like, and you don't need to do all the extra fluff on top.
Mhm. Definitely. This brings up the idea too of how can we integrate some of these concepts that we have from dance science into the studio, into classes, into rehearsal. And I feel like sometimes one of the comments that I hear from dance educators is, it's going to take too much time out of my class time in order to do these things that you're talking about. Let's chat about that idea a little bit.
I think this is a hard one, because I that's one of the biggest things I hear from educators as well, is they only have maybe an hour long class or a 45-minute class. How do they do all of these exercises within the class and still do across the floor or choreography or center work? And I think that's where it becomes important, even more important in the warm up, to change up your stretches, or instead of holding a hamstring stretch, you make it an active hamstring stretch, or you start off the class with maybe you choreograph a like 10 jumping jacks, 10 high knees, some squats. You choreograph a sequence of some of those higher intensity exercises to get the blood flowing. And then the dancers walk in and they know what they're supposed to be doing. I think there's different ways to do it, but it's not to say that it's super easy. Like, it's
Mhm.
definitely still difficult to figure that out. I'm also a fan of giving dancers exercises to do on their own, like for homework. And I know as dance teachers, we can't be diagnosing students' injuries or telling them, hey, you have weak hip flexors, you need to do this exercise. That's a little out of the scope of practice, I think, but being able to tell them, hey, like, you need to do some work outside of class if you want to achieve this in class. And doing spending 5 minutes on your leg holds in class once a week is not going to be enough if you want to get it higher. So being able to, for the dancers to take on that extra outside practice, I think is also helpful too. And it's
Mhm.
sometimes not always up to the teacher to give them every single thing. And
Yeah.
being okay with the fact that the teacher can't give all of those things in one class.
Mhm. Yes. And especially these classes often are, at least a handful of dancers. And if we're going to that idea of individualized things and all of that, we can't have a perfect routine that will hit all of the needs of all of the dancers in the room.
Right.
So, kind of bridging that gap of what can be good for the group as something that maybe gets integrated versus the things that the dancer needs to work on their own time.
Right. Yeah. I think it's hard as a teacher to recognize all the individual things that a dancer has to work on. And I think across the floor is a good time to look at that. Or if you are doing a warm up and say you are doing a stretch on the warm up, just scanning the room and seeing, okay, who is struggling with this exercise, who is lacking in flexibility here, and just kind of making those mental notes. And I think when you work with those dancers over time, you have an idea of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And
Mhm.
that does take some time to build. But if you're teaching a class where you're having a different group of dancers every single week, kind of like a community-based class, then you don't necessarily get that chance all the time. So I find a lot of teachers end up saying, like, I'm going to lead a warm up, take what you need, add if add things if you need it, or giving that the extra time at the end of a warm up to do whatever else you need. But a lot of young dancers end up just doing their splits and things like
Mhm.
that. And so I think that one sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. But I think it's hard no matter what. I don't think there's really a right answer, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm. Definitely. Well, and something that just came to mind as you were talking about that too is like I like that idea of, maybe there's a little like buffer time to give dancers an opportunity to do some of their own things, or being open to somebody modifying an activity that you're doing if they need something a little bit different for their own bodies, especially as we're getting into a little bit older dancers who have more of that awareness and that sort of thing. And I think another thing with all of this too is the dance teachers, when we know that it can be hard to integrate this or like figure out what is the quote unquote perfect option for the class that they're about to teach, it doesn't need to be all up to them. They don't have to create the solution for everything. There's also resources like you,
Mhm.
or different folks who are out there to be able to get some information, or to be able to refer somebody to and say, hey, I think you need more than what we're doing in class.
Right.
Here are some folks to be able to connect with to try to get some more answers for yourself.
And that's why we're all here. That's why we work in dance science and dance medicine, because we're here to help those dancers. And so it's hard to sometimes bridge the gap between what's happening in the studio and then the work that we're doing. But I find
Mhm.
that it's not only rewarding for the dance science professional, but also for the dancer to be able to open up their eyes to a whole new world of looking at dance through a scientific lens. At least that's how I felt when I first discovered just everything kinesiology, or even just like dance psychology or nutrition. Like all of those things can be applicable to dance, and all of it can affect how you're dancing, what your dancing looks like, how it feels. And the longer it takes a dancer to learn those things, I don't want to assume they're struggling, but it's inevitable that they could run into a struggle that someone in dance science world can help you through. And
Mhm.
that's why we exist. So I think um, referring and getting information for yourself is really important, and understanding that one dance teacher may not have all the answers. I may not have all the answers.
Mhm.
It's really takes a team of professionals, and the dancer knows their body best. So what information they're getting from different people just adds to their toolkit, and that's when like the autonomy of the dancer themselves really becomes important. But I think that's developed later on in the career as well.
Mhm.
Part of why I'm trying to get it younger and younger, so they have a little more say in what their bodies are doing, and they don't just have to push themselves because their teacher told them to. They
Mhm.
have a voice and can say, actually, like this really doesn't feel good on my hips. I can, can I do it this way? I think that's really important.
Definitely. And I think especially being able to learn some skills at an earlier age of what are practices that are safe for my body, or if something doesn't feel right, seem right, whatever, I have somebody that I can talk to. I know that there are people out there to try to reach out to, and not just, I don't know, I feel like when I was growing up, there was a lot of this is just the way it is. And if it's not working well, oh well, kind of suffer for your craft. And that's just how this works.
Mhm.
But now to know that there are so many resources out there to try to make life a little easier and a little bit more comfortable is amazing.
Yes, I agree, and I wish that more dancers knew that. I wish that more educators knew that. I hope that educators in like school settings, studio, whatever like dance setting they're in, are also open to sharing that knowledge with other professionals and being a team and helping those dancers. And I think it's important to remember that not one person has all the answers, or not one person teaches the only correct way to teach ballet. Like there's definitely it ebbs and flows with every individual, and that's what dance is, right? Like everyone does it
Mhm.
differently. That is your gift, is that you are the only one that can dance that way. And so I think that's important to realize. And I love sharing this one story about a 7-year-old that I train. I meet with her one-on-one weekly on Zoom. And at 7 years old, she started out not really knowing a lot about how her body feels, or like what it meant to feel a muscle stretch, what it meant to feel a muscle like getting tired, or kind of that like burning sensation we feel when your muscles are getting a little tired. And
Mhm.
I start every session asking, okay, how does your body feel? How does your brain feel? And kind of assessing the body that way. And one time, her mom had emailed me canceling the session earlier in the day because she said her daughter said she was too sore and she wanted to take a rest day. And then said, thank you for giving her the confidence and the tools to know how her body feels. And I still get goosebumps when I think about it, because that's amazing for a 7-year-old to be able to make that decision for themselves, and for the
Mhm.
parent to respect their decision too, and not
Yeah.
just say, no, you have to go because you have to push through. Instead, just allowing them to experience what they feel in their body. I think that's amazing.
Mhm. Yeah. And I feel like that is such an important idea of like being able to put words to what it is that they're feeling, because whether they are interacting with any sort of medical professional, health and wellness professional, especially if, maybe they don't have access to somebody who is a dance specialist and really familiar with dance styles, they need to be able to still talk about what is going on in their bodies and explain it to someone who doesn't share some of that same vocabulary. And so knowing how to describe some of those things for themselves is really important. And I think also, particularly because in the dance world, we see a lot of hypermobility, for example, sometimes even figuring out what it is that someone is feeling if they are a hypermobile person is already more challenging, because some of the signals aren't quite the same. And so being able to figure out how to navigate that is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I still struggle with that too. I've in my own body figuring out, okay, what is this like if I go to physical therapy, or I'm and they're asking me those questions. I still have to think, oh, is it like an aching pain? Is it like a dull pain? Like I don't know. And so it's
Mhm.
important to figure that out too, and to have a 7-year-old recognize those tools so early on. I mean, I think it's really cool, but I think about my own experience. I noticed if I was sore and my body was hurting, or if I was tired, but it
Mhm.
never crossed my mind once to say like I don't feel well enough to go to dance, or to train, or I need to take a rest day. I don't think that
Yeah.
ever crossed my mind, right? It's just that's the way
Yeah,
it was. You had to
exactly.
go.
Yeah, I think it took me a long time to figure that out for myself. I think it was more, when I was going through training as a physical therapist and learning more about, what are maybe healthier practices, or what sorts of support does the body need, or all of these different things. And then I was looking back and going, yeah, maybe I would have made some different decisions if I had known some of this information earlier.
Right? I know. I feel like every person I talk to that works in like dance medicine now says the same thing of like, I wish I had this when I was younger. And
Mhm.
it's not in a like a sad way, I guess. At least for me, it's like, wow, yeah, I wish I had that for myself, but now look at all these other dancers that are going to be so great and have long careers. And even if they don't dance for their whole life, they're still developing these tools that they can use as a human. Or if
Mhm.
they go to play another sport, there's body awareness is still going to be relevant to any other sport too, and sensations you feel in the body. So having developing the body awareness and the autonomy and advocacy, I think, is really important as well.
Mhm.
For any age, no matter what age you figure it out, it's a win.
Yes, exactly. One thing that I think is also important to bring up is, when we're talking about some of these different ideas when it comes to training, whether it's strength training, endurance and cardio, who knows what category it might be in, you don't need to wait until a problem is identified by yourself or someone else to
Hmm.
go and seek some of these things out.
Yeah, definitely. That's also a completely foreign concept to my brain, as when I think back to my 15-year-old brain of, oh, I can just do these things to prevent an injury from happening, or to be able to dance for longer and get better. And I think a lot of times dancers wait until something hurts, or until there is a problem, or until their teacher says they need to do work outside of class, that then they start seeking out help. And I'm grateful that they're seeking out help regardless,
Yeah.
but every once in a while I will get a dancer or a parent that says, like, we just want to make sure that our dancers being safe and as being, still working on strength and flexibility. And I appreciate those parents and those clients as well, because that's, I don't often see that. Just, yeah, we
Mhm.
just want to, cross train. I feel like that's when that happens. Like, my message has been received. Like, that is, it
Yeah,
worked, like, that's what I want, is just do something to help yourself from the beginning, before you feel pain, or before you feel like you're falling behind in class.
definitely. We've talked a lot about how all of these different things can be beneficial for reducing injuries, for example. I think some other things that come to mind also is it can make some of the movements easier, or
Mhm.
make it feel like some of the technique is easier because we know where to control some of the movements from. It also can help with our overall performance and confidence and just how we're feeling when we're dancing and doing the things that we want to do, or being a normal human outside of dance. So it's not just from this injury prevention or injury reduction place either.
Mhm. Yeah, because I mean, if you know exactly what muscles to engage for your turns, you can go into it when playing, and you can play with how much momentum you have. You can go confidently into a triple turn because you know exactly, like, what muscles to engage to stay up there longer and balance longer. And it gives you a different sense of confidence going into technique class or choreography, or just on the performance, like an emotion sort of side of things. Maybe you feel so confident and like calm, cool, collected with the choreography, that you don't really have to think about it all that much, and you can just focus on the performance aspect of it, and you can spend more energy there. I think that's important too, so you don't get on stage and think, okay, like, before I do this turn, I have to plie, I have to make sure my arms are straight, my toes are pointed. Like, it's a lot to think about. You don't have time to think about all of those things when you're dancing, so getting to a point where you feel that confidence and you can just be in that flow state while you're performing is, I think, the ultimate goal, right? So you can actually
Mhm.
enjoy dancing and performing.
Yes. And I find being able to kind of take yourself out of needing to think about all of those things and being able to focus on the performance, whether it's choreography or something that's improvised, it becomes a moment of like a mindfulness activity. Also, just being in the moment and enjoying the experience of what it is that you're doing, and kind of like feeling like you can soak it all in rather than having to think about 1,000 things in the background.
Yes, I remember going through high school dance team auditions and my dad telling me to just enjoy the whole process and soak it in. And I really did not know what that meant. I was like, okay, I'll try. But I had so much anxiety and nerves, and I was so stressed that week leading up to it. And to be honest, I don't really remember enjoying it that much.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed when I made the team and celebrating afterwards, but how do you find the balance of maybe like a bit of helpful performance anxiety, because sometimes it can be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
or like helpful nerves, and still feeling confident and in control of your body. And that's a whole other podcast episode that we could talk about that. But so I won't go into it too much, but the psychology part of it really also plays a factor too. And
Mm-hmm.
that I find the psychology side of dance so interesting as well. And even though I'm not actively teaching that, there's still little things that I do as a coach, or things that I integrate into my sessions that are still more positive, psychologically based practices. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
also that changes everything as a dancer when you learn about that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. One of my favorite things to work on with dancers is really drilling into some of the technique pieces. I know, like, one that comes up frequently in ballet in particular is a dancer trying to hold their arm out in second position at the bar for different activities and saying, like, my arm feels like it gets so heavy or so
Mhm.
tired. And like, it's just a lot of work to do this. And it doesn't seem like it should be. Helping them find what muscles and what to engage so that it feels like they can stay there forever and
Yeah.
not get so fatigued doing it. Or, sometimes dancers will come to me saying, I keep getting this correction in some of my classes, but I can't figure out how to actually do what it is they're asking to do or
Mhm.
asking me to do. So being sort of the interpreter for them, or the translator of what they're hearing from feedback, and being able to figure out how to make some of those changes in their body positioning and movements.
Yes, I totally agree with the last, well, everything you said, but especially the last bit about getting constant corrections from teachers. And I always ask those questions too, like, what did the judges say at your competition, or like, what are your teachers telling you in class? And it's often very similar cues. And then if you ask a little bit further and say, okay, well, do you feel like you're jumping as high as you can already? And they say, yeah, I don't know how to jump higher than that. And
Mm-hmm.
then we discover that, oh, their overall jump, maybe your legs aren't getting higher because you're jumping high, but your legs aren't getting up as powerfully, like they're not fast enough, or like we can break
Mm-hmm.
down the little pieces of it. And so that's also helpful. And I would say for dancers listening to this, if you just start out by writing, what are your goals for dance, what are common corrections that you get, what are things that you like know about your body, um, I think that's a good place to start, to kind of figure out what you need to be training in, and then kind of
Yeah.
work it out from there, because that's really important, to just be able to like reflect on that stuff before you start training.
Mm-hmm. Thinking particularly about some of the younger dancers, since that's sort of an age group that you're really passionate about working with, what are some things that you might tell parents? These are things to consider, or things to watch out for, or a time to reach out for some assistance. What sorts of advice might you have for those parents of dancers?
um, hmm. It's a really great question, but it's kind of a hard question, because it depends so much on the studio environment that they're in.
Mhm.
um, it depends on how much their child is dancing too. So I would say, like, some of the things to look out for would first be like how their bodies are feeling and how their mood is first. If they're coming back out of dance at the end of the night and they're really upset, or maybe they're exhausted, or maybe they're starting to have some resistance to going to dance the next day, like, you can look at their overall load management and make sure that they're not dancing too much. You could see if their body is too sore, how like, what else could they be doing in between classes to help them recover. Um,
Mhm.
all of those things, looking at their technique, if they are starting to fall behind others in their class, and having an open and honest conversation with the teacher to discover where they're actually at, if they do need more outside training, or if they maybe just things aren't like clicking in their brain the way it should be. Like all of those things are important. And you might not get those answers from the dancer themselves, but you might get it from the teacher, or you might get it by observing or listening to like judges' critiques, or observing like their body
Mhm.
language and things like that.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think one thing too is particularly, I mean, I think any and all dancers could benefit from learning more about their bodies, learning things of how do we strengthen, how do we have good mental health, good nutrition, all of these different things. But I think particularly if you have a dancer who has aspirations of continuing to dance through their life, maybe pursuing it as a professional, those are fantastic dancers to get started with learning some of these elements at an early age so that they are preparing their bodies as much as possible and keeping themselves safe as possible and preparing for those big goals that they have for themselves too.
Yeah. And I think that is arguably more important than getting the dancer into every industry class you could imagine, and working with
Mhm.
every like flexibility, acro, strength, whatever, every other coach that you can think of, and having them take all these classes, because that's not, yeah, they're dancing more and they might love it, but is that just adding to the fatigue or the soreness, and not actually teaching them skills for longevity? Because that's going to ultimately become important at some point, and we don't want it to get to a point where they're injured and they have to start learning about it. We want it to start becoming a practice, so they're reducing that risk of injury before, ideally before it even happens.
Mhm. I want to go back to something that you had mentioned just a little bit ago, this idea of load for a dancer and thinking specifically training load when it comes to dance. What are maybe some guidelines or information that might be helpful to think about that load idea?
it's it's hard because as dancers, we usually, depending on what program you're in or what age you're in, usually we say that more dance is better. You want to get better at dance, take more classes. Um,
Mhm,
and I think paying attention to how the body's feeling is really important. I usually suggest having at least one day of rest, and sometimes that's not even possible for some dancers.
mhm,
Um, but if so, say you can't have a day of rest, look at like the intensity levels of the classes. If you're going over, say you're in a rehearsal and maybe you are more in like the core group of dancers and you're not actively learning choreography, you're maybe just like hanging back and watching, or maybe you have like some easier choreography. Maybe that's like a lower intensity rehearsal. Um, are all of your high intensity classes all on the same day? Are all of your low
mhm,
intensity classes on the same day? Or is there kind of like a mix? And sometimes we don't always have that freedom to create that mix, but it could tell us, if I have all of these high intensity classes on one day, I probably don't need to do cross training on that same day either. I could probably use the next day as maybe a rest day or a lower intensity day. We just don't want to see a ton of like peaks and valleys throughout the week in terms of like intensity and load, but ideally kind of like managing it over time, so you're getting a bit of recovery in between those higher intensity days too, or high intensity
mhm.
classes.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, we talk about managing the load and periodization and all of these different things of, even thinking throughout a year, even though dance doesn't truly have a season, like, comparing it to football, for example, where we have an on season and off season, we still have some seasonality to it of maybe we're preparing for shows, maybe it's competition season, audition season, summer intensive season, who knows what. We have lots of options.
Mhm.
But throughout each of those, our bodies may need a little bit different balance, a little bit different support in order for us to get through that, or in order to prepare us for what we know is coming up as well.
Yeah, and I think usually if we're preparing for audition season, the goal, or the not the goal, the what's the word? The I guess what people do, what dancers normally do, is just add more. They just continue to add more. Oh, I have to, like, I want to make sure my arabesque is really high, so I'm going to start doing 50 arabesques per day, and eventually it's going to get higher, things like that.
Mhm.
And sometimes doing more is not the answer. Having a plan is part of the answer. Planning well in advance, not the week before your audition tape is due, is helpful.
Mhm.
And or if you have in-person auditions and you have to, I'm thinking of like a high school dance team again, like a list of skills that you have to accomplish. Coming to me 1 month before auditions might not be worth it, and I have to have that hard conversation with the parent and the dancer that we're going to get you as good as we can get, but it might not meet your expectations because we just don't have a ton of time.
Mhm.
And I don't want you to do exercises and practice every single day, because you either A, could hurt yourself, or B, you're going to feel so burnt out by the time you get to auditions that you could actually perform poorly in auditions. So when we have those different seasons, it's hard. It's hard to manage the classes you're already doing with preparation for the next season. And usually,
Mhm.
like in summer breaks, I just tell dancers, yeah, do some summer intensives if you want, do some summer camps. But honestly, just be a kid and have fun and rest, hang out with your friends. Maybe do a volleyball camp or something. Like do something different, because that is ultimately going to help you stay more refreshed for dance later on. Um, and I mean, kids are going to hear that and say, but I love dance. I want to do dance more. And, I was like that too. But I did reach a point where I got a little burnt out of dance. And frankly, it's been this past year for me. I haven't taken class in the last year because I think I just needed a break from it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm talking about dance all the time. I'm looking at dance all the time, but me, myself, and my practice kind of needed a break because I was burnt out. And for me, that fuse was lit for a long time before it went out. But for a lot of other people, they could go, 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 and then burn out much quicker. And so,
Mhm.
if you want to have a sustainable career in dance, burnout becomes a huge part of managing that load too, not just even fatigue in your body, but like mental burnout, emotional burnout.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think this is a good opportunity for a special segment on every show. So, on every episode, we have the final bow, essentially the take home message. We've
Mhm.
talked about a lot of different topics, talking to kind of different members of the audience as well. What are a couple of things that you hope people walk away with after listening to this?
I hope that dancers can plan a little more in advance, looking at like the periodization conversation, especially because we're getting into summer soon. Look at next year's schedule and start planning out seasons, just a broad overview, instead of waiting until right before classes start. And just at least looking at that as the first step, I think is going to help a lot, because then you can determine, okay, is my child taking too many classes? Do we really need to go to that extra competition 3 weekends in a row, and looking at that
Mhm.
sort of stuff. I think doing another message would be doing some sort of strength or cross training now is going to be better than nothing at all,
Mhm.
or better than later. So no matter what you're doing, even if it's 30 minutes once a week, great. If it's twice a week, even better. Doing something to help yourself prevent injuries and become better at dance overall, I think is going to help tremendously. And if you can't fit in 30 minutes once a week, maybe you add it into your warm ups, but just starting to think about these concepts and how you can blend it with what you're already doing.
Mhm. I love all of those things, most definitely. The other thing is the shameless plug. So this is your opportunity to share whatever you have going on, promote whoever, whatever you have. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I do virtual one-on-one sessions for dancers. I have a lot of availability coming up in the summer. So summer might be a good time to start that training, and then we can talk about how to like maintain some of that training as the new dance season starts. I'm teaching at a couple summer intensives in the summer coming up, a couple conferences, and I'm also hosting a virtual intensive for dance educators in August. But you can find all that information on my website or my Instagram. It's bodykinect.org, or train with Kendall on Instagram. And I post all the time out there. So you'll be able to find all the information there. But I really hope that you join me, whether it's as an educator, a parent, or a dancer, just to learn more about how dance science and medicine can help you and help facilitate a longer and healthier career.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great getting to chat about all of this.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm glad we got to chat too. It was a good conversation.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.